Let's record. Okay, I'll say good afternoon again now that we're recording. Welcome to the weekly webinar. I'm glad to have all of you. Our speaker is here, which is great. And she and I were just chatting about all the different versions of the My Alliance newsletter and my achievements and foibles with sending the correct language to the correct group, and how we think and hope always that the brain booster really is boosting your brain. So with that said, I will kick us off with our housekeeping notes. Looks like everybody is muted. Thank you for doing that. And if you need closed captioning, press the CC Show Captions button at the bottom of your screen, and that will enable the captions for you. We are recording, so this will be available later today to watch again or to share with someone else on our YouTube channel, and we'll have the link for that in our My Alliance newsletter that comes out next Monday. I think those are all the housekeeping notes. So I see some more folks coming on in. I'm always glad to see people join us. And Janet, they'll continue to come in
Sure.
during our time together.
Get used to that with Zoom.
Yeah. So with that said, I'm excited to introduce to you Janet Eli, our speaker for today. And our topic is transition tips for family caregivers. And Janet is especially qualified to tell us this information because in the early part of this year, her spouse, Jack, moved to a long-term care facility for veterans. And Janet had been his at-home care partner since 2017. And she recognized this transition was significant for her and for Jack. So it's been about 10 months since Janet and Jack made that transition. And Janet is here today to tell us some insights and some tips to other family caregivers and people interested in brain health, which I think we all are, about what that transition was like and her sort of lessons, if I can say that, Janet, and things she's found useful and helpful. And as I think we all know, November is National Caregiver Month, caregivers of all kinds, and special consideration and care for those who are caring for someone who has a cognitive change. November is also Alzheimer's Awareness Month, and as I frequently say at the ADRC, we think every month should be Alzheimer's Awareness Month. Every month we are increasingly aware of dementia and ways that we can come up with intervention, treatment, cure, prevention. So with that said, Janet, thank you so much for sharing your thoughts with us today, and I'll turn it over to you.
All right. Well, thank you very much. And I'm very excited to be here. It's a very sad story. You know, they often say this is the longest goodbye, and it truly is. Just a little background on Jack and I. We got married in 2005, and I thought at that point we'd found each other in our 50s. After both being single for a long time, we both had kids. When my husband went on my first date with him, he told me he was never not interested in a relationship until the second date. And then we became a couple. So it was kind of funny in that regard. And we just looked to this wonderful future that we would, you know, finish out our working careers and we'd retire and we'd travel together. And, you know, we had a lot of common interests. And my first indication that something was wrong was in 2013. We decided to purchase long-term care policies for our future, kind of doing all of our, you know, estate planning and such. And he failed the cognitive test in 2013. He didn't, you know, there's like the 10 questions or the 10 words that you have to remember and the clock, all the things that you do for a cognitive test, you have to do for long-term care insurance. And he failed that. And so I was able to get my own long-term care policy, but not one for him. So that was kind of like my first signal that something wasn't quite right. But, you know, going forward, he seemed to be very well and doing good until we got to like 2017. And again, we went to the doctors and we could tell something was not right. And they did a series of tests and they did some scans and things. And that's when they realized that, you know, he was in the very early ages of dementia. And they never gave him an official name, because I know some Alzheimer's diseases, they will give it a particular name. They never did that with Jack. They just said he had Alzheimer's and that was it. So then, as we were progressing from there, then it was thinking about, okay, what was our future going to be like? And in 2019, his neurologist told me I should take away his driver's license because we were afraid that maybe he might get lost, which he had a couple of times. And the other thing was that if he was involved in an accident, even if he wasn't at fault, if they went through his medical records and saw that he had Alzheimer's, they would just blame it on him, that maybe he could have reacted better and avoided the accident. So it was very traumatic to have him give up his driver's license. And then, of course, we sold his car so that it wouldn't be a reminder for him. And I do know, knowing with other caregivers, that that's a big issue, is when you have to tell your spouse they no longer can drive. But then, of course, now that puts all the onus on the caregiver, because now we're responsible for doing all the driving. So if we're going on a long journey, we're the one, like not this past summer, but the summer before, Jack and I went on a trip to California, and I drove the entire trip. And it's a lot of stress on the caregiver. So you have to be careful of that. COVID was actually a benefit because I could keep him close to home, right? Because he wasn't out going anywhere, because they told him he couldn't go anywhere. And it's funny, during that time period, we decided to move out of Kansas City and move up to St. Joseph so that we could have a bigger house and a bigger yard. There's lots of walking trails around here, so it would make it easy for Jack to be able to be outside. Having grown up on a farm, he was the kind of guy that always needed to be outside. So that actually turned out to be a benefit. I joined some support groups, and that's when I learned that Jack would probably be eligible to go to a veterans home, because he was in the Navy during the Vietnam War. And in order to go into the VA home, you had to have served during a war. So just having served in the service didn't qualify you, but you had to serve during a war, but it didn't matter which military branch. So that was an aha moment for me. And because I had started looking at long-term care facilities, which are very expensive and, could bankrupt me. And so Jack's very healthy. So the fact that he was eligible, we went through the process, put him on the waiting list. They told me that it would take probably 18 to 24 months before he would take him. When in fact they ended up taking him in 12 months. So that was a blessing for me, because literally right now I could still be waiting for this time. And I will tell you that during that year, it became very difficult. I think part of the problem that you get is not all of the family is aligned with what you feel is the right thing to do for your spouse. And you'll have different family members who will have different opinions about how things should be done, but don't necessarily work in your favor, the caregiver, and don't necessarily work in the best interests of your spouse that's going through this disease. And so Jack would suffer from sundowners, and he would want to go out for walks by himself, and he'd get angry if I wouldn't let him go by himself. And and of course your family members aren't there with you on a day-to-day basis to see that. All of a sudden you're no longer able to go out for lunch with the girls, or you're no longer allowed to go to a meeting, and you certainly can't. I had a granddaughter that was born 5 years ago, and she lives in Chicago, and I wanted to go and see her every 6 weeks, and I'd always have to try and find somebody to take care of him because he didn't want to go. He didn't want to go to Chicago. So I would have to try and find people to take care of him during that time period. So it became very onerous. I felt like I was sort of trapped. I felt that Jack and I were oftentimes angry at each other, frustrated with each other, because neither of us were getting out of this relationship that we wanted, because he didn't know what was happening to him. I knew what was happening, and that I was moving away from being a spouse to more like a parent type relationship. And of course, he didn't like that. And I was taking away his independence. And so part of me was like, I can't wait for him to be able to go into the nursing home. But on the other side, terrified about putting him in a nursing home. I mean, it just seemed like the worst. As a spouse, it was like the worst thing that you could ever do for your spouse. Anyways, last fall, we got the notice that he would be eligible going to January. So then it was just like, okay, now it's just that countdown. And I will just tell you, the day that I took him to the veterans home, it's there's one here in Missouri, and I think the difference between that and a regular long-term care facility is, number one, it cost me a lot less. It still cost me money because he wasn't disabled during the service. So, and Alzheimer's doesn't count, by the way. So you could have diabetes, you could have a heart problem, you could have a back problem, anything that you could somewhat relate to your service, even if it's just like, airy fairy, you could link it and you could get coverage. But Alzheimer's doesn't count at all, which my husband was in the Navy. He was on a ship. He was in blue waters off the coast of Vietnam and the Philippines. And yet there's no tie because Alzheimer's is a no on the list. So that's kind of something important for everybody to understand, Kelly, that why is Alzheimer's not on there when in fact, statistically, I know I'm going off topic here a little bit, but statistically, I think something like 65% of veterans over the age 65 suffer from Alzheimer's. Oh, that's kind of a coincidence, don't you think? But apparently that's probably why it's on that list there. Anyway, so going back, he was eligible. I do pay for it, but I'm still very happy that I don't have to pay like, $8,000 or $10,000 a month. So the day he went was probably the most traumatic day in my entire life because you can't tell them they're going. You just have to be prepared. You've got to have all his clothes ready and his TV and his chair and all the things that they tell you can bring. And I kept calling and making sure, like, well, is he going to have this? And is he going to have that? And they finally said to me, we're never going to take care of him as good as you are, but I promise you, we will take very good care of him. So that was important. And the more you visit, the better it will be for him. And it's funny, I started out visiting him about 5 or 6 days a week. And it's about a 35-minute drive from St. Joe to Cameron, where he's at. But it's exhausting, if you keep doing that every single day, like a job. I mean, it's just very exhausting. So I had to back that off. So now I go like maybe 3 or 4 times a week. And when I do go, I'll stay for a good 3 or 4 hours, take him out for walks, spend time with him in his room and something like that. So that's just kind of like the background. So he's been there 11 months now. Very often he still asks me, we're married, right? So why aren't we together? Why can't you live here? And it's always like a groundhog story because they don't know that I need to get out of here. And you just kind of do what I would call a distraction, a redirect, and you just kind of change the topic, which I'm sure anybody who's already a caregiver or in that world, you understand that you have to find ways to redirect your partner or that person when they're focused on one thing and you want to move them off. So finding good redirects is probably like my first tip that I would talk about and like what I do with my husband, find something that they really like. Like my husband loves music and he loves to dance. So we have a stereo in his room. And by the way, he has a private room, which is amazing. He has a private room. And all the people in the Alzheimer unit have their own private rooms versus in the other sections of the veterans home, they have to share a room with somebody. So that's nice because then you can bring in all their stuff and it's just their stuff. They're not sharing a room with anybody. And you can set it up so it's more like a home for them. And, it's all his pictures on the wall, pictures of his family, anything that reminds him of our life. And then, of course, when we go in and we shut the door, we may take a nap together or may watch TV together, but it's just him and I, and that nobody else is going to come in except maybe the staff just to knock on the door and say, hey, it's dinner, or we're doing accountability or something like that. So that was definitely a plus if anybody is considering a long-term care facility, if you can swing having a private room. I think that makes all the difference, because then the room is designed for you. But back to the redirect. Jack loves music. He loves to dance. He was a DJ for 30 years, if you can believe that, a party DJ for 30 years. So as soon as he hears music, and that's the thing, you're always looking for something that they've done consistently over all of their life. Don't try to introduce something new to them, because believe you me, they just won't attach to it. So something that he did for 30 plus years, the music he connects to, he loves to dance to it. So that's why we have a stereo in his room, so that when, like, if I want to get him to take a shower, you know, because the staff couldn't get him to take a shower, because you obviously know sometimes it's a struggle to get an Alzheimer's patient into the shower. They're clean, they don't, there's nothing wrong, I don't smell, you know. So it's like, yeah, but you haven't had a shower in 5 days. I think it's time to go. So, you know, a lot of times this can be distracting, or if they get angry and he wants to leave, sometimes I've come in and found his clothes all packed on his bed. So these are all, you're always looking for some good distracting tool. So I blast the music and I start dancing with him, and immediately whatever that fear or that anxiety is kind of just like dissipates. And now I can either say, hey, let's get you in the shower, honey, or, you know, or it's putting the clothes back in the closet, or whatever it needs to be, or it's time for dinner, or I have to go home, but I'm going to be back. The nice thing you can say with an Alzheimer's patient is, if you go away, you don't have to say, well, I'm going to be gone for 2 weeks. I'll see you in 2 weeks. Never say that. You just say, I'll be back in a couple of days, honey, because they don't have any sense of time anymore. So whether it's, you know, 2 days or two, I mean, I saw him Saturday and Sunday, didn't see him Monday or Tuesday, and he said he hadn't seen me in so long. So, you know, so they don't have that sense of time. But what you do is you just say, I'll be there in a couple of days. I'll be there in a couple of days. And before you know it, the 2 weeks is gone. And so, you know, don't ever think that you can't go away on a holiday and leave them. So, you know, I mean, I wouldn't leave them for a month or anything like that, but that's it. I think the other tip is too, is we now have a better relationship, believe it or not, since he's been there than we had before. He's more loving with me. I'm more loving with him, because I think we both felt like we were in some kind of, we were trapped. We were both trapped in this situation that neither of us saw an out for. And so when I go visit him, I'm more loving, I'm more caring. When I give him a shower and make sure he's got clean clothes, and I check his room and make sure he's got the right clothes for the right season, and does he need no underwear or whatever. It's like I always do it with a happy smile, because I'm not feeling burdened anymore. And that's because when I do leave him, I can actually have a life. And that, because that's what was missing. I no longer had a life when he was with me. And a lot of people had said to me, well, you could just get somebody to come in, and, you know, you could have caregivers come in, you know, you could have them come in 3 or 4 times a week. The problem with that is, though, is that, first of all, he had no physical problems. It was, he really just needed a companion. And it's, oh, they're always very structured. Like they, oh, well, you've got to do a minimum of 12 hours a week, and it's going to be, you know, 4 hours at a time, 3 days a week. I needed a babysitter. I needed to be able to go to the movies with a girlfriend, or I needed to go have a lunch. And so those caregiving programs didn't work for me. And we only have one adult daycare center in town, and he didn't like it. He didn't like it. I took him there, and he didn't like it because they had no garden. They had nowhere for him to go. He would have been stuck in a little building. And I just knew the first time I took him there that that was never going to happen. So for me, the transition to the long-term care facility was actually better than if I had continued to try and keep, you know, have somebody at home. And plus, nobody's going to stay with them for 2 weeks while you want to go on a vacation, right? So, and certainly not as kids. So there are times when I look at him and I feel like he's unhappy there. Well, because he tells me so. But also I think back at what life was like for him when he was at home. He was also unhappy. So whether he was there or whether he's at home, he was unhappy because he's unhappy with his situation. He's unhappy with the fact that he can't do the things that he wanted to do. But what's important for me now is that he's safe. And I see that he has happy moments and we have happy moments. And even if he doesn't necessarily remember everything that we do when I come to visit him, like yesterday, we went for a 3 mile walk. Well, today he probably wouldn't remember that he went on that 3 mile walk, but you know what? He was enjoying it in the moment. And, we saw deer and, we were looking at the water and watching the hawks and he was exercising and he just felt really good about himself. So I just go, he has happy moments now. And so therefore the happy moments are, just more important than anything. So keep that in mind that whether you feel like they're going to be unhappy, creating those happy moments of him being able to play pool with one of his friends that comes to visit him, or we go out for walks, or we go to a movie, or, we go have lunch somewhere, mini golf, or whatever it is that your partner likes to do, or just watching TV together and holding hands or taking a nap together. Those are create happy moments, and that's the most important thing that you can create for your person. But you have to be in the right place, and that's so very important, because let's face it, all the veterans at the veterans home are predominantly male, because most of them are Vietnam era. Women were not drafted during that war, so the only women that would be there were those that volunteered. There are I think there's like maybe 5 females in the entire building of about 130 30 veterans. None in the Alzheimer's unit. There's only 34 veterans in the Alzheimer's unit. All have private rooms, have a big, huge area, and they have 3 gardens. I mean, I'm telling you, this couldn't be a better place for him to be, because they've got the 3 big gardens. And the employees are Missouri veterans, so excuse me, Missouri employees, so therefore they get good benefits. None of them want to lose their job, so they're very caring to all of the veterans. But so who are my people that I connect with? It's the wives, right? It's wives, no husbands, wives, and maybe, some sons or some, things like that. But the support group we have there is wives. And, when I talk to other wives, what I've noticed, which is why I've decided that I wanted to be a spokesperson for Alzheimer's, and why Kelly gave me this great opportunity to be here today, is that I've recognized how we have to be in our relationship with our Alzheimer's spouse, or maybe it's a father or whatever it is. Because if the most important thing is we have to out survive our mate. And I keep that very in the front of my mind. I have to out survive Jack. Many caregivers do not out survive their Alzheimer's person, because they get exhausted, they mentally get depressed, they become unhealthy, they don't eat right. And so they'll die of other diseases before their Alzheimer spouse dies. And that to me is so paramount, that I have to stay so healthy mentally and physically, so that I don't have to worry that Jack's going to be without me, because I know I'm still, he can be where he is, but I still have to be his person. And if he lost his person, nobody's going to take care of my husband like I take care of my husband, even if I'm not with him 24 hours a day. So that's the secondary, or I don't know how many tips I've got it so far, but that's a very important tip, is you remember, you have to take care of yourself. Remember, if you've ever flown on a plane and you see where they say, if the oxygen things drop, put it on your mouth first, then put it on your child, because if you put it on your kid first and you pass out, you're no good to anybody. And I always remember that story, and I have to take care of me so that so that Jack can have a better future. So take care of yourself and whatever that entails. So the story that I was going to tell you was a few weeks back. We were seeing another couple coming out at the same time, Jack and I, where we were going off for lunch. And I mentioned to her that I was going to Las Vegas for a couple of days to be with my sister. And she started to just cry right in front of us, in front of her husband, in front of mine. And I was like, oh God, what did I say? How did this happen? And she said, I want to go and spend time with my family. Well, it wasn't the time for me to have an interaction with her about it, obviously, because her husband was right there. And I didn't know how much he would understand what she was discussing. But it made me realize that I have to have a conversation with her that she needs to go do that trip. And her husband will be better for her having gone and done that trip and coming back. And because you could see that she's going to be building up some resentment that her life is passing her by her having to come and be with him, and that she's estranged from her sisters. So to me, you have to take care of yourself. That's very, very important. Whatever that is. I know one of my friends, her husband never wanted a cat in the house. So she went out and got a cat. He'll never know, because he'll never be back to the house. So you have to do for yourself the things that are important for you, because remember, that makes you a better and happier person, so that when you're with your spouse or your loved one, or maybe it's your mom or whatever, or your dad, so that you're not angry, you're in a happier place, so that the relationship then becomes so much better, so much better. The other thing is, I think you've got to remember when you're interacting with this person, that you're interacting with the disease. Oftentimes I'd like to think I'm interacting with Jack the way he was. It's just automatic to think that, oh, he would really love to go on this trip. Maybe I could take him on this trip. And then you have to remember, like, no, there's no way I can take him on this trip. I just cannot. And so, or if he gets like an angry moment or he hangs up on me, I have to just remember not to get too frustrated, not to internalize it. That's the big key. You don't want to internalize this, because you're dealing with a disease, and 1 minute he can hang up with you, and then he can call you back 10 minutes later and he doesn't even know he hung up on you. So you just have to keep that in mind, that whenever that person doesn't react the way you'd like them to, or the way they did in the past, you're not dealing with who or she was at the point that they were normal. You're dealing with a disease, and I can tell you, it's not going to get any better. They're never going to be cured. It's only going to get worse. So you have to just deal in the moment and just deal with it like, okay, I'm dealing with a disease, and how am I going to interact with the disease, as opposed to interact Jack, the man that I married. So that's another important things to remember. He's just no longer the husband that I knew. And so, when we were married, I mean, I didn't have to put him in the shower. I didn't have to make sure that I changed his underwear, or unfortunately, Jack is still continent, but I know the time will come that maybe he won't be. And then I'll be dealing with a whole other set of issues. So I'm already prepared that will possibly happen, and well, not possibly, probably will happen in the future, unless he dies prior to that. But he's pretty healthy, so I'm thinking he's going to be around for quite some time. And so, I clip his fingernails, I clip his toenails, I put lotion on him. That's not what you do with a spouse. That's what you do with your kid. And so your relationship is flipped. So you have to have that caring side of you that you can do that. And it's quite possible you cannot. Like, I remember, taking care of doing things for my mother in her later age. And there were certain things like I didn't want to do. And maybe that's because it was, mother-daughter, and maybe I couldn't make that leap to do that for her. I mean, she didn't have Alzheimer's. She, had other kinds of diseases. But I remember, she might have an accident and I'd have to put her in the shower and I'd have to wash her. And it was like, I didn't like doing it. I didn't want to do it. Versus with Jack, I guess because he was my spouse, maybe it's a little bit different. So, I could see that, with my mom, it was a totally different relationship than with my husband. But there may be some wives who don't want to do it with their husbands, and that's okay. Because you know what? The nursing home will do all of it for you. You don't have to do it. That's like the plus. I choose to do it because I know sometimes I can coax them into the shower sooner than they can get him into the shower. Like if they ask him and he says no, they kind of like walk away versus, because I remember too, one time his daughter had showed up and she sent me a picture that he had all his clothes on the bed, folded, ready to go. And I said to her, well, just tell him we're going to put them away. And he told her, no, I'm not putting them away. And she didn't want to have a discussion with him about it. So she just left them. So I had to get into the car and, well, I mean, I could have asked this. I think the staff, if I remember correctly now, I think I called the staff after she left and asked them. So she was not willing to find a way to redirect him to get him to put his clothes back in the closet versus I could. So there's the difference of two different people, and there she's the daughter. She's not going to have that conversation with her dad because she hasn't been doing that on an ongoing basis versus I could. And what I would have done is if he'd given me a hard time, I would have just sent him off to have supper or lunch. And then I would have quietly hung up all his clothes in the closet while he was in there. And by the time he got back to his room, he would have forgotten. So those are some of the skill sets that you have to learn, that not everybody's going to handle things a different way, but you have to figure out what's going to work for you, what you're willing to do, what you're not willing to do. And if you don't want to do those things, if you don't want to clip his nails, well, you know what? They have podiatrists that come in and, or the staff will do it. You can just say, hey, his nails need trimming, and they'll do it for you. So that's a choice of whether you want to do it or not. I tend to do it because I love him and I don't mind doing it. And I just feel like nobody's going to do it better than me.
Oh, Janet, you are just amazing. Thank you.
Thank you.
So much good insight. Thank you so much for sharing your story. I think I could listen to you tell us all the wonderful things you have done with and for Jack all day.
Oh yeah, I
And
know. And we're probably running out of time.
we are unfortunately about at our end time. I forgot
Right.
to say, because I was so excited to introduce you, that people could ask you questions in the chat, and I hope you see that there's a
Let's,
message in
yeah,
the
we got
chat.
time for do a couple of those.
Yeah, so if anybody has any questions or things you want to know from Janet, feel free to use the chat and or unmute yourself and
Oh,
speak up. Um,
yeah.
Janet, sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off, Janet, but I wanted to make sure you saw the nice words in the chat
Oh, yeah, yeah. Oh,
for
yeah.
you.
Oh, thank you. Somebody, yeah, I'm gonna save this because I think there's some good things in here. So,
Great.
yeah. Did anybody have any questions?
Anything anybody wanted to ask Janet about her caregiving experience or about the transition that she and Jack made, feel free to do that now. And Janet, if folks think of something they want to ask you after, is it okay if I share your
Oh,
information?
absolutely. And there's one last thing I wanted to say. This is just kind of like the end of the thing. They often say that the strong will survive, like this, that's the whole thing. But I don't believe that. I believe it is those that are willing to adapt.
Mm,
So it's not
okay.
just being strong. You have to be willing to adapt to the new situation that you're in. And if you don't, then it will fail
That's so
because you have to, because you're going to keep going through different stages with that person, and you have to be willing to adapt to every stage that you're going to go through. And
yes.
oh, I like the way you mentioned lots of wives being caregivers. I hope that single people with dementia get some care. Oh, I do too.
I do too. Yeah. The way we define family is changing. And I'm hopeful that the more we know about dementia and everything it's going to require, the more we can involve our family, our chosen family, our communities, our healthcare professionals in caring for those we love in all the different ways that we love them. So thank you. That's a
Yeah,
great point, Mandy. And I agree with all the people in
yeah.
the chat who have really appreciated your time with us, Janet. Me most of all, if I will
Oh, thank you, Kelly. Thanks for
say.
having me.
Thank
I'll be happy to come
you.
back because I had lots more stuff to say. I
I'm
can say
sure.
that another
Well,
time.
yes, I am scheduling webinars for 2025, so Janet will definitely be on the list.
Okay.
Um, if it weren't Thanksgiving next week, we'd have a webinar next Thursday, but we're going to take the day to
Good.
enjoy the holiday with our loved ones. So no webinar next Thursday. We'll miss you. We are encouraging you that if you have not already watched, or even if you have watched our film, Why? Um, Consider watching it next week during the Thanksgiving holiday. Consider sharing it with your family. I'm going to put a link to it in the chat. It's 37 minutes. So after you have the turkey and all the good food, you can relax on your couch and put your TV on and watch the Why movie on YouTube. It's got a lot of great insight from caregivers like Janet, from folks who have diagnoses, from Dr. Jeff Burns and Dr. Russell Swerdlow and Dr. Ryan Townley, Michelle Needens, our social worker hero, all kinds of great stuff. So if you have not watched it, now's a great time. If you have watched it, I can tell you haven't seen it 20 times or more. I find something new in it every time to make me feel motivated. So look that up. We'll have a link to Why in the My Alliance
I
newsletter
have
that
a
comes out
daughter who
Monday.
lives in Chicago, and she
Oh,
came to
somebody's
visit
watching it
us
right
Sorry.
now.
with her family.
I'm not sure who that is, but thank you. I recognize that opening line. We have a gentleman in the movie who starts off the film that says, "I have a daughter who lives in Chicago." So I love it. I love that someone clicked on the link already. All right, so next week we'll be off. The week after, our speakers will be our CCN, Cognitive Care Network team. We'll have some of the social workers from that team talking about the work that they do and how they can support you. So I hope you'll join us for that. And the Brain Booster is also taking a much needed week off next Thursday, but we'll also be back the following week for the My Alliance. The question in the chat: when will the recorded version of today's webinar be released? It takes about 10 minutes for it to finish processing after I close the meeting. And then it'll take me probably about an hour to upload it. So it will be on later today. Okay.
Is there a way to
You'll
save
be
the
able to see it.
chat?
There is a way to save the chat.
To
Janet,
save
I
it.
can save it for you and email it to you.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay. All right. Great.
All right, everybody. Thank you so much for being with us. I hope you have a wonderful holiday next week. Happy Thanksgiving. We're grateful for you. Janet, I'm going to be in touch because, like I said, I'm scheduling for 2025 now, so you'll be on the list. And I hope you'll come back and join us.
Thank you.
Everybody
Enjoy
else,
California.
thank you, and I'll be back in Kansas City next week. Okay,
Okay.
bye
Bye-bye.
everyone. Bye bye.